This week saw the Nedbank Nedpad Business Foundation session take place. To unpack the outcomes, we have the Divisional Executive of Group Public Relations at Nedbank, Mr. THABANG CHILOANE, who will also explain to us the importance of reviving US-Africa trade. Now, could you tell us a little bit more about some of the outcomes of the Nedbank Nedpad Business Foundation session that took place earlier this week?
Yeah, we were lucky to have the ambassador of the USA here, and he, among other things, promised that they will be working hard to make sure that the AGOA Act actually gets passed again so that Africa can continue benefiting from it. As you would know, that is the act that allowed African countries to send goods into the USA without paying taxes. So that was one of the things. But also he mentioned that trade between South Africa and the USA will actually grow and be more and more, because now they've realized that they have been lagging a bit in terms of trade between the continent and the USA. However, they have been in the continent, they've been on South African ground for a long time. It's just that in terms of numbers, they may not have been that much. So out of the event on Tuesday and the discussions there's been a lot of interest. And in fact, one of the chambers of commerce of the United States, in fact, the biggest one in the world, their representatives were also at the meeting, and they had other meetings outside of our event. So it was actually a good thing to have both the ambassador and the representatives from the Chamber of Commerce from Washington.
Now, you mentioned the fact that the U.S. ambassador was there. Of course, there must have been discussions, as you mentioned, with regards to U.S.-Africa trade relations and why it's so important. But let's talk about the importance of it really when it comes to economic growth, not just for South Africa, but the continent at large.
I think the continent has realized that the more friends it has, the better it will be for all of us. So US, of course, has an influence across the world and certainly in Africa. And if we grow the US part, we will grow the economies of this continent. And remember, Africa has got about 8 of the fastest growing economies in the world on this continent. So as we're growing with the US, there's the Chinese element, there's still our traditional partners with Europe and every other part of the world that wants to trade with South Africa. So US is important because they do have the money to can trade with us, and we do welcome their business.
Now, what is the role really that Nedbank is playing in terms of facilitating intra-Africa trade, and really the importance and why Nedbank is that involved?
Well, we've realized that if we want to be Africa's most admired bank, which is our vision, we really need to do something out of the box to make sure that we actually get to that vision. So facilitating intra-Africa trade has been something we've been doing for the past 2 years through this forum. We have teamed up with NEPAD, which is the new partnership of Africa's development. And with them, we have managed to host about 5 ambassadors who represented their own countries and a minister from that country. And the idea is really that if we can trade internally on the continent, we will also be able to have that as part of our economic trades and also externally to the continent. So Africa stands to win that way, and Nedbank sees itself as a good catalyst to making sure that that happens for the continent. We are committed to the continent, and we really want to make sure that we succeed on the continent and in South Africa.
Now, we heard in the news, of course, that you've now really partnered up with Bank. Tell us about that and its importance. I mean, you mentioned when we were off air that it's a single most exposed bank or represented bank really in Africa. Tell us about this partnership.
Well, we have managed to get 20% stake in ETI, which is the holding company of EcoBank. And that actually gives us a platform through which we can be able to be present in those countries that traditionally we would not have been. Traditionally, I mean, because of the kind of language barriers, and of course, it's a bit far from us here in South Africa. So in SADC and East Africa, we will have Nedbank as branded as Nedbank. And in the rest of the continent, Central Africa, West Africa, we will have EcoBank as our partner. So if we have businesses in South Africa and you want to stretch your arm out to Central Africa and West Africa, Nedbank is the place to go because they now have a representation there, and you'll be able to facilitate your business quite easily and repatriate your money easily as well.
I just want to backtrack a little bit as we wrap up. Where do you see really U.S.-Africa trade going if you were to anticipate within the next sort of year or so?
Well, we are hoping that the AGOA will get readmitted again, and the Congress will pass it, and that will actually continue opening more doors for South African businesses and also for the rest of the countries on the African continent. And America has become and has been one of the biggest consumers in the world if you compare it with any other person except now for China. And if you can have your goods in America and you have them in China, as they say, Bob is your uncle.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. That was THABANG Chiloane, the Divisional Executive of Group Public Relations at Nedbank.